Hey, does Fuji's next camera really compete with Sony? Before we get into that, be sure to like the video down below and subscribe to figure out how to use your camera. Now, the camera at hand is the Fuji X-S10. I had a comment in one of my recent videos comparing this camera to the Sony A7C. Now, I don't think that this camera really competes with the Sony A7C since the A7C is full frame, but I do think that the X-S10 competes with Sony's aps-c cameras, specifically the Sony A6600. So the best way to start off is to get into the specs, so let's start off with Sony. The Sony A6600 comes in at $1,400. It's an aps-c camera with a 1.5 times crop. It does have internal in-body image stabilization, has 24 megapixels. It films at 4K 420 8-bit internally at a max frame rate of 30 frames per second, and externally it'll film at 4K 422 8-bit. You can film at 1080p at 120 frames per second. There is no record limit. It has a flip up screen and it is 503 grams with the battery and memory card. So the Fuji X-S10 comes in at $1,000. It is an aps-c camera with 1.5 times crop. It is 24 megapixels, has 5-axis in-body image stabilization. It'll film 4K 420 8-bit internally at a max frame rate of 30 frames per second. It'll also film 4K 422 10-bit externally. It has a max frames per second of 240 frames per second at what I'm guessing is 720p, but feel free to correct me in the comments below. It has a 30-minute record limit, a fully articulating flip out screen, and then it is 465 grams with a memory card and an SD card. So these are the specs. As you can see, there are a little bit of differences. The main differences that I see are going to be in autofocus and then image quality, and maybe lens selection. I don't know too much about Fuji's lenses, but lens selection might be a big part in this. So comment down below on if Fuji has better aps-c lenses, because I know Sony is a little bit limited. So autofocus. Obviously we don't have both of the cameras here that we can test. This is actually the Sony A6600 with the Sigma 16mm f1.4 that you're seeing right now. I love the autofocus on this camera. It's really fast and responsive. I don't know how well it really works in like really bad low light situations. I can't imagine it's that well, but the autofocus off of the Sony A6600 is really spot on. I'm really happy with it. I've watched a couple videos on the X-S10 and people are saying that the autofocus is very responsive. There is eye tracking, so hopefully that does mean that this has some pretty good autofocus, but I know that Sony is competing with Canon's dual pixel autofocus, so obviously the better autofocus system is going to go with Sony. So now actual recording quality itself. So both of these cameras are going to film the same quality internally. They both film 4K 420 8-bit internal. That's not where things are interesting. Where things get really interesting is externally. So the Fuji X-S10 does get a really big boost when you film externally. Where this is really interesting is where it comes to price. Since you would have to go and buy something like a Ninja 5 to get external recording, the Ninja 5 itself is right around $500, and you can get a fairly cheap SSD to go in that for no more than $100. So you're looking at like $600 brand new. I'm sure that you can get a cheap Ninja 5 used for right around $400. That $400 is very important since that is the difference in price between the Sony A6600 and the X-S10. So now with the X-S10, you can get the camera and an external recorder / monitor for the same price as the Sony A6600. At that point, you are getting better image quality. You're getting more colors and more information to work off of. I do think that the X-S10 heavily competes with the Sony A6600. It's right around the same price range, same form factor, same sensor size, but it is going to produce a better image quality, but at the cost of autofocus capabilities. So should you switch systems? If you already have a Sony A6600, should you sell it and go get the X-S10 and a Ninja 5? Probably not. I would just stick with the Sony. Would I even recommend getting the Fuji X-S10? I don't know. Hopefully when the camera comes out, I get to rent it maybe, test it, compare it between my Sony A6600 and actually see which of these two is the better camera. I've never used a Fuji camera, so I don't really know. All I have to work off of is videos that I've watched and recommendations from other creators. But I wanted to get this camera on your radar since it is producing super high quality video on a budget, assuming that you get a Ninja 5. For under $1,500, getting 10-bit 422 is a pretty good deal. But that's all that I have. So what do you think about the Fuji X-S10? Let me know in the comments down below. Subscribe if you're not already subscribed, and all right.